Well, from the sound of music to street art, Richard Hambleton was considered a godfather of the genre, an artist whose influence is still being felt today. The Canadian died in October in New York, the city he called home for nearly 40 years. Stephen D'Souza looks back at the life and the legacy of Hambleton, who came to be known as the Shadow Man.
In summer of 1980, it was impossible to miss Richard's shadows.
Lurking under the cover of night, Richard Hambleton's art wasn't meant to be simply stared at. It was meant to be experienced.
First time you saw one, you practically jumped out of your skin because you thought somebody was lurking in the alleyway and was about to grab you and take your money.
Before the British street artist Banksy, there was Hambleton. It was New York City in the early 1980s. The Vancouver native was dodging police on the Lower East Side to create the shadowy figures that would earn him the title, the Godfather of Street Art.
I mean, they really show that the work is part of the city.
Yeah.
Oren Jacoby got to know Hambleton filming the documentary Shadow Man, chronicling what would end up being the artist's final years.
I really think Richard is the original gangster of street art.
In the mid-1970s, he shocked Vancouver with anonymously painted bodies spattered with red paint. A conceptual artist, he created a fake identity and detective agency to solve the non-existent crimes that had people in media at the time scratching their heads.
And we have his aliases here, Rick Tracek.
His art, though not his name, was well known by the time he arrived in New York in 1979.
Richard had it. When you were in his sphere, he was just a compelling personality. He was brilliant, he was a genius.
My paintings may look fast and spontaneous, but there's a lot of planning and premeditation that goes into it.
He painted 450 shadowy figures across New York and became a fixture on the Lower East Side art scene. Hambleton toured Europe and even painted his figures on the Berlin Wall. Andy Warhol repeatedly asked Hambleton to paint his portrait, but the mercurial artist never complied.
Quirky doesn't do it justice. He could be charming, he could be charismatic, he could also be unbelievably manipulative.
For all his notoriety, Hambleton never craved fame, even worked to avoid it. In the late 1980s, he retreated from the spotlight, battling drug addiction and paranoia.
All he wanted was to do his art with no constrictions. He lived outside of the box and, kind of like a nomad.
He moved constantly, often trading art for food and rent. He was frequently evicted. Angry landlords trashed countless pieces when they kicked him out. Gallery owners Christine and John Woodward tried to take care of Richard those years, putting him up in various places and paying his legal fees after evictions.
He always wanted his art to be more important than himself. It was always that way. It was never about him. It was about his art.
In 2007, the Woodwards hosted his first solo show in 22 years. Then, in 2009, another show, this one sponsored by Giorgio Armani. In his last years, cancer had eaten away at his face. His heroin addiction continued, and he was suffering from scoliosis. Through it all, though, he kept creating.
There was something that he was working out. There were demons or ideas or things that was being expressed through the work that he was doing right up till the day he died.
Hambleton died at the end of October, days before one of his works was set to show at the Museum of Modern Art.
We all wish that he could have been here.
And a few weeks before the documentary about his life was released in theaters.
He never really did the horse and rider series on the street.
As so often happens when artists pass away, John Woodward says he's seeing renewed interest in Hambleton's work. One piece he says captures the essence of the artist is this. Long before Photoshop, Hambleton took an image of Vancouver's Angel of Victory statue and transformed it.
I had worked with Richard on this a long time ago, and he said, don't show this to anybody until I leave Earth.
Hambleton created this piece in 1974 while still in his 20s. You can even see the early signs of the shadows that would later define him.
That's the genius behind his work, is that Richard always thought ahead. He was one step ahead of everybody.
Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, New York.